On 11 August, low over occupied Luhansk, a Ukrainian strike drone is tearing toward a vehicle that was never supposed to be reachable. A Buk-M3 launcher. 6 missiles on the rail, its own radar on the roof, a system Russia advertises as able to swat stealth fighters out of the sky at 70 kilometers. Ukrainian outlets price it at about $45 million. It is parked in the occupied rear, behind the jammers, behind the screen. In the one place its crew still believed was safe. The drone is closing anyway. The only question is how it gets in. The place is Topoli, a name that means nothing to most people and everything to the men who fly against it. Occupied Luhansk region, the deep half of the occupied zone, the part of the map where Russian units have spent 3 years telling themselves the war is something that happens to other people. Nobody on the Ukrainian side says out loud what flies these routes or who flies them. That silence is deliberate. Out here it is the cheapest armor there is. The drone still has minutes to run. Everything that happens in those minutes lives in the gap between what the machine on that pad can do and what it cannot. A Buk-M3 is not an old Soviet leftover. It is the 3rd generation of the Buk family, the newest medium-range mobile surface-to-air system Russia actually fields, and it was built specifically to fix what the earlier versions got wrong. The M1 and M2 carried 4 missiles per launcher, and often needed a separate radar vehicle to feed them targets. The M3 carries 6. Each launcher has its own engagement radar, which means one vehicle can find a target, track it, and fire without waiting for permission from anyone. The missile it fires, the 9M317M, goes active in its own final seconds, its own little radar in the nose looking for the aircraft, so the launcher does not have to hold the beam all the way in. Fire, turn away, survive. Its envelope reaches out to roughly 70 kilometers and up to 35 kilometers of altitude. In Russian marketing material, it is credited with the ability to engage 5th-generation stealth aircraft. Whether that claim survives contact with an actual F-35 is a question nobody has answered in public. But the claim tells you what the system is for. It is built to look up and far out. That is the seam. A radar tuned to catch a fast jet arcing across the sky at 10,000 meters is not the same instrument as one hunting something the size of a folding table, flying low over tree lines, moving at the speed of a car on a highway. The Buk-M3 is a hammer designed for a very specific nail. Nothing in that design is built to look for what is coming down the tree line right now. And it is sitting still. That is the second half of the problem. A Buk battery is supposed to be mobile. Shoot and scoot, that is the doctrine, the entire reason the thing rides on tracks instead of sitting in a concrete revetment. But mobility costs fuel, costs crew hours, costs the risk of throwing a track on a bad road. And when a unit has spent months in the same slice of the occupied rear, when nothing has ever come for it, the discipline erodes. The position becomes a home. Cables get run, netting goes up over the launcher and stays up. The crew sleeps somewhere with walls. Camouflage netting does a real job. It cuts the visual outline, softens some of the heat signature, breaks up the shape that a human eye or a matching algorithm looks for. What it does not do is defeat time. A large tracked vehicle on a prepared pad in the same place day after day is findable by anyone patient enough to keep watching. The net buys concealment. It does not buy invisibility. And Ukrainian reconnaissance over the occupied east is not a glance. It is a stare that lasts weeks. The clock on the run is already turning. The approach runs low. That is not style, it is physics. Every ground radar in the world is fighting the curve of the Earth, and the curve wins. A radar catches an aircraft at 300 kilometers because the aircraft is up in the open sky. Put the same radar cross-section down at 50 or 80 meters and that number collapses to a fraction of itself. By the time the return is clean, the thing is already inside the reaction window. Down low, the drone is also swimming in ground clutter, the dirty return clawed back off tree lines, power lines, roofs, and terrain that a search radar has to filter out or drown in. Flying low is slower, it is more dangerous, it burns more of the margin. It is also the only way in. So the machine hugs the terrain and the first wall comes up to meet it. The outer layer of any Russian high-value position is built on listening, not shooting. Radio reconnaissance. Trucks and posts whose only job is to listen to the electromagnetic spectrum for things that do not belong. And the moment they hear a control link or a video downlink where there should not be one, to call it in and start jamming. Russian electronic warfare in the occupied East is dense. It is one of the few areas where the Russian military has genuinely kept pace, and any Ukrainian planner routing a strike through Luhansk builds the route around it, not through it. The posts do not stay listening. They escalate, and each rung is a different way to kill the thing coming at them. The first rung comes up as the drone crosses into their arc, wideband noise. The station floods a broad slice of the spectrum with garbage, tens of kilometers in every direction, hoping to smother whatever is out there without knowing what it is. It is a shotgun. It degrades everything, including sometimes the jammer's own side, which is why crews do not leave it running all day. The second rung is narrower and far more dangerous. If the operators can pin down which bands the incoming drone is actually using, they pour full power into exactly those. For a lot of Ukrainian systems, that means the analog video and control frequencies, the ones the whole ecosystem grew up on. Get that right, and the picture on the operator's screen goes to gray static, and the machine flying at you becomes a brick with propellers. The third rung is the clever one. Instead of blinding the drone's satellite navigation, you lie to it. Jamming GNSS floods the band with noise so the receiver loses its fix, and the important thing about that is the machine knows. It reports the loss, it switches to backup, the operator sees it happen. Spoofing is different. Spoofing broadcasts counterfeit satellite signals so the receiver calculates a position that is simply wrong and reports it with total confidence. The drone in the air does not think it is lost. It thinks it is exactly on course. It flies its programmed route into an empty field 10 kilometers from anything that matters, and nobody on the Ukrainian side understands why until the recon imagery comes back the next day showing an unmarked crater in a sunflower crop. Blind a machine and it notices. Lie to it and it does not, which is why the answer to spoofing was never a better satellite antenna. It was to stop needing the satellites at all. Inside the airframe still working its way east. Alongside whatever navigation receiver it carries, sits an inertial unit. Gyroscopes and accelerometers, sensing every turn, every acceleration, every climb the airframe actually performs. From a known start point, it can compute where it is with no outside signal whatsoever. Nothing to jam, nothing to spoof, because it is not listening to anything. And it is the inertial unit that catches the lie. When the satellite feed suddenly reports the airframe 2 kilometers left of where the gyros know it turned. The flight computer has a contradiction on its hands, and a well-written one resolves it by throwing out the satellites and trusting the physics it can feel. The cost of that is drift. Inertial navigation accumulates error. Small at first meters, then tens of meters, then more, growing with every minute of flight. Over a long run, the drift can be the difference between a launcher and the field beside it, so the fight on a deep strike route becomes a race. How far can you go on dead reckoning before the error swallows the target, and can you correct before it does? You correct with the camera. The nose camera looks down at the world, and the flight computer matches what it sees against terrain it was given before launch. Tree lines. A bend in a road. A rail embankment. A pylon line running east. Every landmark that matches is a reset on the accumulated drift, a hard correction back onto the true track. The machine navigates the way a pilot navigated in 1935 by looking out the window and comparing it to a map, only it does it 40 times a second. Somewhere in the middle of the run, the Link Degrades. This is the part nobody puts in the promotional video. The feed stutters. Frames drop. Telemetry arrives late or arrives out of order or does not arrive at all. And for a stretch of seconds, the people watching the screen have no reliable idea whether the machine is still flying, still on course, or already down in a field with a Russian crew standing over it taking photographs for a Telegram channel. There is nothing to do. There is no override, no second chance, no way to reach across the jammed spectrum and touch it. You wait. You watch the last known heading, and you do the arithmetic in your head about where it should be if nothing has gone wrong. The reason the feed stutters instead of dying is frequency hopping. A modern encrypted datalink does not park on one channel where a jammer can find it and sit on it. It jumps dozens to hundreds of times a second, across a spread of frequencies inside an encrypted band, and the sequence is only known to the two ends of the link. Every time the jamming crew locks onto a channel and dumps power into it, the conversation has already moved somewhere else. The jammer is not beaten. It is simply always one hop behind, chasing a signal that is never where it just was. What that produces on the operator's screen is not a clean picture. It is a picture that breaks and reassembles and breaks again. Ugly, survivable. That distinction, stutter versus cut, is the entire difference between a strike and a write-off. The terminal phase is where the Buk's own design turns against it. The last defense around a high-value air defense asset does not come from the Buk itself. The Buk cannot shoot at something already inside its minimum range, and below its radar's useful look-down angle. The real last defense is the counter-drone screen. Spotter posts watching for inbound quadcopters, mobile fire teams with heavy machine guns on pickup beds, sometimes an interceptor drone held ready to ram whatever comes in. On paper it is defense in depth, 5 overlapping tripwires. In practice each layer fails on its own. The EW post is tuned to the wrong band. The spotter picket is covering the wrong arc. The gun team is 30 seconds away eating. And a screen with a hole in it stops being a screen. It becomes a story the unit tells itself. The drone comes down the last stretch. At this range everything the enemy could have done has already either worked or not worked. The jamming did not break the link. The false satellite signals were thrown out somewhere back over open ground. The terrain matching has scrubbed the inertial drift down to something that fits inside the length of a tracked chassis. What is left is a shape under a net that has not moved in a long time and the last few hundred meters closing on it. And then the reporting closes the loop. On 11 August, Ukraine's general staff announced that defense forces had struck a Russian Buk-M3 medium-range air defense system in the area of Topoli in the occupied Luhansk region. The commander of the unmanned systems forces, Robert Brovdy, call sign Madyar, was first to put the claim into public circulation. The general staff statement does not name the munition. It does not name the unit. No strike footage has surfaced. What it names is the result. The system was hit. Ukrainian outlets priced the loss at about $45 million. 6 missiles that will never leave the rail. A radar that will never light again. A vehicle whose replacement has to be built, tested, crewed, and driven a very long way east to stand where this one stood. And the Buk was not alone on the list. The same general staff report bundled it with the rest of the day's work, and read together the list is more revealing than the single headline. A Russian command and observation post near Terebren, across the border in Belgorod region. A supply depot in Rovenki, back in occupied Luhansk. And from the day before, 6 Russian UAV control points struck across Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia and Kursk. Read as a target set instead of a tally, the list says something harder. A launcher, a command post, a depot. 6 control points for enemy drones, not one of those is a frontline trench. Every single one is a node, a place where information or fuel or orders or air defense coverage gets concentrated so it can be distributed. Ukraine is not counting Russian soldiers. It is unplugging the things that let Russian soldiers function as an army rather than as a crowd with rifles. The Buk sits at the top of that pyramid because of what it protected. A medium-range surface-to-air system covers a bubble. Inside that bubble, Russian helicopters can stage, Russian supply columns can move in daylight, Russian drone crews can operate from fixed positions instead of hiding, and Ukrainian aircraft and drones must either route around or pay a price to enter. Remove the launcher, the one machine that was supposed to make the sky above Topoli somebody else's problem, and the bubble does not shrink politely. It pops. Every asset that was sheltering inside it is now exposed, and the nearest remaining battery has to stretch its coverage sideways to cover the hole, which thins it everywhere else. That is why the general staff framed the day as reducing the enemy's air defense capability across several operational directions at once. Not one vehicle and the sky it was holding up. There is also the arithmetic, and the arithmetic is what Russian planners cannot argue with. $45 million of hardware. Against a strike drone that, whatever it was, belongs to a category that costs somewhere between a used car and a modest apartment. The exchange rate runs nowhere near 100 to 1. It runs closer to 1,000 to 1 and only in one direction. Russia can build Buk launchers. It cannot build them faster than Ukraine can build the things that hunt them, and it certainly cannot build them at a comparable cost. Every high-value system that has to leave its safe rear position and start moving every 48 hours is a system spending its life driving instead of watching the sky. That is a permanent tax, and it is paid whether or not another drone ever arrives. The crew of that launcher had a specific belief, and the belief was geographic. Distance equals safety. Far enough behind the line, deep enough into occupied territory, and the war becomes something you read about, That belief was reasonable in 2022. It was arguable in 2023. On 11 August 2026, it was a professional error. And it was the last one that crew made from that position. Another set of contract soldiers found out that the occupied rear is not a rear at all. It is just the part of Ukraine that Ukraine has not reached yet. Which brings this back to the thing the drone was flying against at the start, the one question that has been open since it crossed the line. How does something that cheap and that small get through a defense built by a country that has spent 3 years learning to stop exactly this? The answer is that it does not beat the defense. It routes around it. It goes under the radar horizon where the 70-kilometer envelope means nothing. It hops frequencies faster than a jammer can chase. It stops believing the satellites the moment the satellites start lying and finds its own way home on gyroscopes and tree lines. Not one of those is a miracle. Every one of them is an engineering answer to a specific Russian countermeasure, written down, tested, and flown until it worked. There is no footage of Topoli. There may never be. What there is instead is a line in a general staff report, a number from Ukrainian outlets, and a hole in the air defense map of occupied Luhansk that Russian officers now have to plan around. The map of what is safe keeps moving east. Nobody in Moscow is drawing it anymore.